What is a hero? A mythological figure, often of divine descent, endowed with great strength or ability? An illustrious warrior? No. It's a person admired for achievements and noble qualities, one who shows great courage. Welcome to the What's a Hero podcast, where we dive deep into what a hero is and what makes them that hero. I'm your host, Ken Frownfelter, and I'm going to be introducing you to some of the world's most likely and unlikely heroes. You may have never heard of them before, and they most likely have never met you. But they all have one thing in common. They are ready to do whatever it takes to help make you better, even if it means sacrificing everything for you. Let's get into it.
This is episode 69 of the What's a Hero podcast with me, Ken Frownfelter. A sheriff deputy was cleaning out the basement of the Missoula County Courthouse one afternoon in the 1970s when he stumbled across a stack of wanted posters dating back to the early 1900s. The nearly 200 documents, some faded and torn, told stories of murder, theft, cheats, broken promises, and daring escapes. Intrigued, the deputy showed the poster to Missoula County Sheriff John C. Moe. Being a career lawman, the sheriff took an immediate interest in the newly found material. "I looked them over and decided they would be of interest to historians," Moe said. "I looked them over and thought, well, I'll put them together in a book." So Moe donated the collection to the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula in Montana. In 2003, and a selection of the documents is presented here. In this book that we're going to read today, we're going to read parts of it. We're not going to read the entire thing like always, but it's a book called Wanted Posters of the Old West and Stories Behind the Crimes Themselves. It was written by a couple of folks, Barbara Pfeiffer and Martin Kidston, and they mention a ton of different things in here that will actually, it supports the heroes that we talk to on this program all the time. The things they go through, the things that they try to protect us from, how they go about doing it, and how things have changed since the 1800s to now, how it is that we kind of hit that technological stride that we're able to now do things that before would just be considered impossible. There were ways they did things that there was no necessarily scientific basis for, and yet everybody used it. It was a standard. But determined to not be that useful until somebody else popped up with some idea that, hey, let's try something else. And this new thing came about. So these new heroes, as they continued to try to catch the bad guy, which they always do, and try to stop people from doing the things they shouldn't be doing, what they're doing is they're showing us how to be able to change the landscape based off of technology, based off of ingenuity, based off of just their heroism in general. So early in the 20th century, every county in the western United States had a sheriff's department, and the growing cities had police forces. Each of these law enforcement agencies worked largely alone, covering its turf and doing the best it could without the national data and communications network so familiar today. Western sheriffs and police departments had to communicate by mail, telegraph, or telephone, spreading the news of wanted fugitives to their own haunts, or to their known haunts, and along likely paths of escape, roads, and railway lines. When they rejected European government in 1776, Americans also rejected a national police force. The only federal officials with arrest power were members of the United States Marshal Service, whom the Treasury Department regularly hired after the Civil War to track counterfeiting of the currency that nationally chartered banks produced. The marshals were not immune from state laws, though, and until 1889, states could charge them for imagined or actual crimes committed in the line of duty. These officers did not even draw salaries until 1896, but were paid on a fee basis. When needed, the Justice Department temporarily borrowed agents from the Secret Service until Congress allowed President Theodore Roosevelt's Attorney General, Charles Bonaparte to create the Justice Department's own Bureau of Investigation in 1908. 2 years later, the department had 34 special agents who could investigate only fraud in land sales or involving national banks or bankruptcy, and antitrust cases, involuntary servitude, and immigration naturalization. The Mann Act, M-A-N-N, Mann Act in 1910 banned transporting women across state lines for immoral purposes, and the Bureau seized it to go after criminals who had broken only state laws but traveled out of state with women. The 1919 National Motor Vehicle Theft Act gave Bureau of Investigations agents an additional tool, but it would be 16 more years until their employer became the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And not until 1934 could the FBI's G-men, government men, arrest suspects. Private industry stepped in to fill the national police void in 1850 when Scottish immigrant Alan Pinkerton founded the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Its logo, the eye that never sleeps. His agents were willing to and able to cross jurisdictional boundaries that stopped government agencies. Within 5 years, the Pinks had contracts with several national railroads to protect their lines. Wells Fargo added detectives to its staff in 1852, and the Brinks Armored Car Company came along in 1859. Other private detective agencies popped up, but Pinkerton outweighed them as it opened offices in major cities around the United States and Canada. How interesting is that federal agents they didn't even have arrest powers necessarily that anybody recognized in these towns, these cities, these states, because if they'd go into these areas by themselves, they'd be there and they'd say, "Hey, I'm looking for, whatever, or we're looking for these people that committed these crimes," that either they wouldn't be taken seriously, or as they're in there, the people that are there are so loyal to each other, they think somebody else is coming in to start taking their brothers or their sisters or whomever away. And so then they start getting these, and this is what I'm assuming anyways, then they would start getting these crimes charged against them. "Hey, you can't do that. You can't do that in our city. We don't allow that." And they're like, "What are you talking about? We're federal agents looking for a wanted fugitive for whatever reason." And they wouldn't be assisted. They'd actually be arrested. They didn't have the immunity that they have now. Now, there's a big push and there's a big conversation about immunity and qualified immunity, and that's actually kind of mellowed out a little bit since 2020. However, that's still a conversation that people are having. And obviously, this is a conversation we've been having for a long time. It was just a little bit different back then. But the look that you think about, that we didn't have cars, until 1900, give or take, Henry Ford and Model T and Model A and all that stuff, right? But you still had Brinks Armored Car Company come along in 1859. Obviously, they were being pulled by horses or whatever, and it was probably still an armored car, and probably similar to what we know today with a little porthole for the gun barrel to poke out, and something like that. And it was probably very similar to the ironclad ships that they used during the Civil War that were just so heavy. So I would assume the team of horses that it would take for them to pull that, because it had to be bulletproof and everything else, they'd have to be a large amount of horses, or just large horses in general. But anyways, the book continues on. It says, all were ready to go to work when two new types of crimes were invented. At Malden, Massachusetts in 1863, Edward Green committed the nation's first armed bank robbery, killing the banker's son in the process. Just before he was hanged for murder in February 1866, Jesse and Frank James and 9 sidekicks began the civilian career that continued their Civil War guerrilla tactics. They robbed a bank in Liberty, Missouri. That October, the Reno brothers lifted $10,000 from a railroad train at Seymour, Indiana. The James gang discovered train robbery in July 1872, taking a $4,000 shipment of cash along with $600 from passengers' pockets. These new types of robbers all rode horseback until Henry Starr robbed a Harrison, Arkansas bank in February 1921 and escaped in a stolen Stutz Bearcat automobile. Both private firms and local law enforcement agencies communicated with wanted circulars sent to likely locations asking for help in capturing and holding fugitives until one of their officers could arrive. Rewards were a hoped-for source of income for deputy sheriffs. The Pinkerton Agency and its employees never accepted reward money. Posters advertising for information about fugitives had been around since the printing press met a literate enough population. When Louisiana privateer Jean Lafitte was targeted by Governor William Claiborne in 1813, state-printed posters offered $500 for the pirate's capture. Lafitte patriotically attacked only vessels of U.S. enemies. Within a week, Lafitte replied with his own posters promising $1,500 for Claiborne's delivery to pirate headquarters on the Gulf of Mexico. Early posters were printed in small quantities and distributed locally. They listed names but had no pictures. The locals knew what one another looked like. Wanted posters in the Old West were not plastered around as generously as movies show them. As this volume demonstrates, they addressed fellow officers more than the public. I mean, those are all famous names that we're talking about here. Jesse and Frank James, and I guess the Reno brothers, the James gang, and then Jean Lafitte. All these guys, they just, things just kind of, once they started realizing that they had mobility, they can get these things. When we had to start moving more amounts of cash along the plains and along the railroads and everything else, those just became easy targets. And so when people are destitute and they're down on their luck, obviously these guys are going to take what they want to take. And then you have pirates like Jean Lafitte. Yeah, he's kind of patriotic, but it's a different kind, you know. He's stealing from all these guys, and so when they're putting this out there saying, hey, we want this guy arrested, he's now he had such pull that he's now saying, well, I've got more money. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I want $1,500 for this sheriff's or this governor's arrest, and then brought to me. You know, how crazy is that? And then the other part that really gets me is the posters were all printed in small quantities, but distributed locally. So they're given to these local areas. So they weren't going way across. So you look at, like, I remember watching the old TV show Kung Fu, and everybody had a wanted poster of Kwai Chang Caine, you know, $5,000 alive or no, $10,000 alive, $5,000 if he's dead. And everybody seemed to have one. And then they were able to determine, oh yeah, that's what he looks like, 'cause from a drawing or whatever. And then you look at all these other cowboy movies that you've seen, and everybody's got, they go 100 miles or 200 miles or the other side of the country. You know, they're going from New York to Silver City or Carson City or whatever in Nevada. And then there's all of a sudden there's a wanted poster that beat them there. So that didn't necessarily happen, which is kind of goofy. I mean, it may have eventually made its way over that way, but they weren't as big and noticeable at the time. And additionally, they just didn't have the photographs. They didn't have the pictures that we have now of people. Everybody's got their license and everybody's got some photo of them that we can put on wanted posters. But the bottom line is, back then, they had to go off of a different type of description, a different type of describing somebody than their photo. So how did they do that? Well, the sheriff and police did their best to create word pictures of the fugitives. but many physical characteristics such as clothing, hair color, or amount of facial hair were easily changed. Officials listed the best details they had on what was not so easy to alter: limps, manner of speaking, and scars. The relative commonness of scars from gunshot wounds mentioned on these posters certainly shows that career criminal is a latter term for an old type of bad guy. It was a bonus if the officer could describe the type of honest labor a fugitive might take, as well as the social milieu he would seek, often the company of sporting or lewd women in saloons or pool halls. As Europe and then the United States became more mobile via railroads and cities became more densely populated, law enforcement struggled to invent better ways to identify traveling criminals, as well as law-abiding citizens. Applied science was improving life in many ways, and police officials turned to it. Beginning after the Civil War, photographs, body measurements, and fingerprinting became the hot new technology for criminal identification. Many of the posters in the book include the mysterious numerals of the Bertillon measurement system and the Henry Park or other fingerprinting sorting systems and or rare mugshots. Like they said, the mugshot was super rare. They obviously had the career criminal thing, but not everybody had a camera if they got arrested. So they get arrested in the Old West somewhere. And there's no guarantee that sheriff has a camera to take this person's picture with. But did they know how to take fingerprints? And what is the Bertillon measurement system? We're going to find that out. Mugshots. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency claims invention of the photographs, now known as mugshots, a close-up of the subject's face from the front paired with one in profile. Other private detective firms and police organizations quickly began keeping these photographic records. But by the 1870s, the Pinkerton collection was the United States' largest. Besides photographing their own captives, Pinkerton agents clipped photographs and articles from local newspapers and forwarded them to headquarters in Chicago. Lawmen, who sent the Pinks requests, including eyewitness accounts of crimes and criminals, often received the needed identification in reply. Getting pictures out to other officials was expensive and time-consuming. Individual prints could be pasted onto a few wanted circulars, but halftone cuts for printing many copies could be made only in large cities. Thus, many posters did not include images. The Bertillon measurements. Today, biometrics, measuring human beings, is a respectable field of applied science used to design user-friendly buildings, vehicles, appliances, and furniture. Where to place an elevator's car's control panel. What's a good height for a drinking fountain? Biometrical statistics provide the guidance. The field started as anthropometry. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. In the 1880s, when Alphonse Bertillon, a French police clerk and son of an anthropologist, invented an application for his father's theory that each human was physically unique, as proved by comparing precise measurements of bony body parts. Unfortunately, Alphonse and followers thought such numbers could identify criminals or criminal types, as well as if psyches were shaped by skeleton proportions. What this Bertillon's system did, though, was help police get past physical disguises. For about 2 decades, and many more in France, police around the world thought that collecting these 11 standard measurements was the best way to identify individuals. The information Bertillon originally recorded on his cards was height in centimeters above 1 meter, so that 62, sometimes written as 162 or 1.62 in the United States, indicated a height of 1 meter plus 62 centimeters, or about 5'4". Stretch, and the stretch was from left shoulder to right middle finger when the arm is raised. Length of torso, span of both outstretched arms. Diameter of skull at the greatest point. Width of the skull. Length of the ear. Left foot while subject's entire weight was on it. Left middle finger. left little finger, left forearm. A Bertillon card also held mugshots, full face and profile centered on right ear. Along with the number of assigning eye pigmentation, color plus type, to one of 7 classes, a general description and precise measurement of scars, moles, tattoos, or other distinguishing marks in their positions on the body. It all seemed scientific and infallible until 1903 at the 29-year-old U.S. disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because I found, as I'm reading this, this is the thing that really caught my attention. A new prisoner named Will West went through Bertillon measuring, and the numbers on his card matched those of a man already incarcerated there. That man was William West, who was no relation to Will, but who looked like his twin when baffled officers put them side by side. The newer technique of fingerprinting began to seem much more promising, but as posters in this volume show, Bertillon measurements, or attempts at them, were used for years more in some locales. Today, Bertillon's work survives in measurements tattooed inside the ears of racing greyhounds, and historic photographs verifiers sometimes refer to Bertillon's principles when comparing a person's photograph at differing ages. Can you imagine going to prison or going somewhere and they find someone that looks there's no history on this. There's no further exposition on this. But the fact that this guy named Will West goes to prison, he determines that he has the exact same measurements, the same everything as this other guy, and this other guy has the exact same name as him. Now, we all know Will West is William. And then when you put them next to each other, they look like twins. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I guess there's always that thought that, you have a twin somewhere else on this planet or whatever the case is, whether they're alive or, you've seen those pictures of, say a celebrity now, and then they show some portrait from the 1800s or even further back, and it's uncanny how close they look. Could you imagine doing that then and seeing that this other person looks exactly like you, has the almost exact same measurements as you, and you're darn near their twin? That would be an interesting read right there. Anyways, British anthropologist Sir Francis Galton published the first book on fingerprints in 1892, although he was frustrated in the attempt to use them to identify racial characteristics. He had proved that they did not change over a person's life. By Galton's calculation, the odds of two people having identical prints were 1 in 64 million. Already familiar with Galton's ongoing work, Argentine police officer Juan Vucetich obtained the first conviction using print evidence that same year in 1892. It was for murder, after a woman killed her 2 sons, cut her own throat, and claimed an outsider had attacked the family. Vucetich used a bloody print from her home to prove this case. The year after the William West problem, the prison at Fort Leavenworth began to fingerprint its inmates. That same year, the St. Louis, Missouri Police Department was the first city forced to adopt dactyloscopy, or fingerprinting. The New York State Police had begun fingerprinting criminals in 1903, the year after the state's Civil Service Commission had begun fingerprinting its applicants. By 1907, all branches of the United States military did likewise, and in 2 more decades, fingerprinting was the standard for identification. The process of visually comparing unidentified fingerprints to those on file was painstakingly slow. Many United States agencies adopted a classification system developed by Sir Edward R. Henry of Scotland Yard, while others chose the less complex one that New York State Prison Captain James H. Park and his son Eugene adapted from Henry's. Both were based on the observation that a person can have as many as 10 fingerprint patterns, and that whorls account for nearly a third of those patterns. Henry assigned values to whorls depending on which fingers had them. The right thumb, the right ring finger had 8. The left index finger had 2. The left little finger had 1. Right index finger had 16. The right little finger had 4. Left middle had 2, and so on and so forth. He then added the values of positions 1, 7, 3, 9, and 5. Values of the other 5 fingers were added together, and the result written as if it were fractions. Whorls on the right thumb, left middle finger, and left little finger gave a Henry classification number of 18/1. His system resulted in 1,024 classifications, so figuring the Henry number reduced the search to only 1 in 1,024 of the fingerprints on file. The Parks simplification worked with the prints in the sequence they appeared on the recording card, where the right hand was printed first and the left hand beside it. The Parks system and Henry system fractions could match only if the subject had no whorls at all, or 1 on every finger. Either numeral appeared on wanted posters, depending on the issuing jurisdiction. To complicate matters more, other classification systems were also in use around the U.S. until 1983, when the FBI made its 3-year-old computerized fingerprint database available to all law enforcement agencies. The Department of Justice opened its Bureau of Criminal Identification in 1905 to collect print cards nationally. 2 years later, to save money, the collection was sent to Leavenworth, where convicts did the matching. The 14-year-old nonprofit International Association of Chiefs of Police soon created a rival print collection, one not reviewed by criminals. Weird, huh? That is really weird that the Department of Justice would choose to have criminals determine who's and start matching prints on people. And so the Chiefs of Police Association said, no, we're going to not have criminals do police work. I'm going to leave it at that, or else I'll say something I probably shouldn't say. Finally, in 1924, Congress created the FBI's Identification Bureau, its fingerprint files combining those from Leavenworth and from the National Bureau of Crime Identification. Police agencies across the nation sent print cards there, where technicians needed 3 work weeks to check a print against the files. So, in this book, the posters in this volume came from that era of transition when police and sheriff's departments were trying to enlist science in the service of law enforcement personalities. So personalities on both sides still peek through officialese as the description of forger, Harry Mays, a boozer, a dope fiend, and an all-around deadbeat, or Sheriff Aaron Clement's frustration at working long distance. Let's all get together and watch this business, horse stealing, closer, and there will not be so much of it. These posters and the intriguing tales behind them put a fascinating transitional era into sharp living focus. So like I said, there's such a wealth of knowledge that came from just these people trying to determine how do we identify people, how do we figure out who's who, and had these people not thought, I mean, even if something, let's say the Bertillon measurements, right, that was a solid try, and it worked out for a little bit until we started, everybody started kind of commingling and kind of getting closer together as people started going into bigger cities and we started growing as a nation. The more we grow, the more the railroad came in and connected everything. The more we started having automobiles, and our travel just became quicker. We started becoming smaller because you could go from one place to another in no time. I can be on the other side of the world tomorrow if I wanted to, right? Or if I could afford it. But that just shows how small the world is. If I were to go back in time 100 years or even 200 years and say, yeah, I've gone to here, or I'm going to be in, let's say I'm going to be in London tomorrow, which theoretically is possible, they would not believe that because they knew that it took however. So let's say I'm in San Francisco. There's no way that I'm going to go across the Pacific and cross Asia and cross all those other countries to get to London. So I would cross the United States, cross the Atlantic, and then I would be there, right? Crossing the United States took months. Then crossing the Atlantic Ocean took another couple months, I'm assuming, or weeks. The world has gotten so much smaller the faster our travel has gotten. In the same vein, you have all these people, all these law enforcement agents and these scientists that are trying to work on how do we work together to now share this information and get this stuff out to people so that they can help identify these criminals that are wearing disguises or changing their looks, or they're going into places where people don't know them. They're not recognized. They're not shown. Nobody knows who they are. And a lot of these smaller towns, they knew everybody knew each other. So there's a stranger in town, right? That sort of thing. That was easy to identify. There's a wanted poster that now comes out, and they say, "Hey, that's the stranger. It's got to be. Look, here's all the things. It's all the descriptors." But if things were a little bit askew, there was just, oh, he's got blue eyes and everything matches, but this guy's blue eyes. Well, maybe they were wrong about the blue eyes, or no, there's other little things that help with the description. And the more we have, the more we start putting into it, and we start looking at the human body a little bit further as far as fingerprints, or we start looking at measurements, or we start looking at things that don't change on people. Then we can start helping curb this ability for criminals to commit crimes and go out and steal things or hurt people or do whatever. And we can find them, because the more we're able to find them, because look at just over the last, let's say 20 years, 30 years, when cameras have been so prevalent in businesses and in banks and in everywhere. Now there's cameras everywhere on every street corner. Everybody has a camera in their hand. Everybody has a camera in their pocket on their phone. We have cameras everywhere. We're able to put this out there and say, hey, this person has done this. Here's actually actual video of them committing whatever crime. How difficult is it to determine who that person is, especially if you don't know who that person really is? Yeah, we can have a picture of them, we can have a video of them, we can do whatever. But if we don't know who they are, we don't even have an idea of who they are, it's hard to identify them. We have to put that out, and we have social media now that we can put that out there and say, hey, does anybody recognize this person? And that's how they were able to determine, major criminals, people that have committed major crimes, such as the Boston Marathon bombing and things of that nature. They see, hey, this is a person of interest. We're looking for this person, and they put it out, kind of major news outlets and things like that. So they start determining all these things, but we're getting that from cameras. Back then, they didn't even have anything like that. They had to know who this person was, and then how many crimes went unsolved because they didn't even have the descriptors on these people. They didn't have. They may have had descriptors. We're looking for a guy that's 5'8" and has a dark, scruffy look to him, and they would use varying descriptive purposes, varying descriptive ideas to put these people out there. Like they talked about that one guy, he's a dope fiend. Oh, I know that guy. I mean, how was it you're able to determine that? But it was just plain speak for them. Now we do things a little bit more professional, but that was the deal. Those were the people that were developing our country and developing a way for us to fight crime and bring people to justice, the right people to justice. And I'm not talking about some kind of false accusation or false conviction or anything like that. I mean, the right people, the people that actually commit the crimes, bringing them to justice so that they are not continuing to commit crimes, and we can live this life of that we know we have. Nevertheless, this episode I wanted to kind of show these heroes of the past that developed these processes that we still use today to help make us a better place. And even if we're not using some of their processes, we learned from them. We learned what they did and how we can build on that or change it a little bit to adjust for a changing species. Things are always changing, but man continues to do things that we shouldn't be doing. And we need to have people that are going to search for them. So I wanted to kind of read that today, go over that, go a little bit of history on how it is we developed identifying purposes and these heroes that started it all, that wanted to develop a way to find these people. And it is appreciated, and it's always a good read, and I always seem to like that sort of thing. So nevertheless, that's where we are. If I know it's a shorter episode today, I know that's what's going on. However, it is what it is. I've got a couple good guests coming up that are just top-notch folks. Just scheduling and everything else kind of gets in the way every once in a while, and there are responsibilities that need to be taken care of. Nevertheless, if you have not heard other episodes of the What's Hero podcast, you can find us on social media, every social media, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn. Check us out. Ask questions, chime in on various, I'll have advertisements for episodes on there. Chime in on what you liked about it, if you liked it, what you thought was cool. If you got questions for the guests, always ask those. It's always welcome. You can find us in every other episode that we've ever had on the What's a Hero podcast.buzzsprout.com. Go there. You can find prior episodes, and it has a link for your favorite podcast platform in which you can go there, subscribe, download the episodes, and have them with you while you travel, or while you're working out, or while you're going on a hike, or whatever it is you're going to go do. You can have it with you. So hold on to it. Those of you that continue to listen every day, I appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And I do want to say thank you to all of our teachers, our nurses, our firefighters out there, police officers. You guys make the difference. You make the absolute difference in the lives that we live every single day, with the service that you give to other people and the sacrifice you make of your own life so other people can be blessed. And I want to thank not only you guys, but veterans. You guys are over there on the front lines, making sure we live in a country that we can continue to live in and be the best country in the world. I know those of you that listen in other countries, I'm not downplaying you guys. I love you guys. I just love America as well. So thank you to everybody that serves everybody else, that helps other people, that gives of their time and their life to other people. You guys are what makes the difference in this world. So, I have been Ken Frownfelter, and this has been the What's a Hero podcast, and we are clear.